Hello there, this is Sohail Hasni, your host at Energypreneurs. Cheap solar power, batteries, and electric vehicles are changing the transport and energy sector as we know. I bring in guests to this podcast who will help you with their ideas to navigate this energy transition. Thank you for joining. Hi, Penny. Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm looking forward to a very exciting discussion on logistics and many things that you do. Maybe introduce yourself first.
I'm Penny. I'm Filipino, working in a Filipino-owned international port operations company. It's a joint venture with my family business. It's more in the freight forwarding space. So when people talk about logistics, it's a broad category. It can go from transportation to supply chain. Logistics is everywhere. So I'm particularly a freight forwarder with a shipping background. I used to work in Mediterranean Shipping Company in New York, the head office in the United States. And yeah, that's primarily what I do.
I like that. It's a sort of orchestrator of cargo and logistics. So on the renewable energy space, right? What influence or does a freight forwarding and logistic bring in?
I'm only seeing in the past 3 to 4 years that this is becoming part of the decision making of our customers. So our customers would be the likes of project managers, but primarily it's the procurement we're talking to and manufacturers. We can talk about the layers more and more as we go, but it was always price driven. Whichever is the cheapest way to go, even when it comes to decision making of which manufacturer to use, it was always based on price. Now, especially European companies, I think the green transition has really, in a way, the EU has forced companies to place the green transition as part of their criteria. Recently, we're seeing criteria such as carbon emissions in the cargo. Where does green energy go into logistics? It's now part of the decision making. Right now, it's not part of our decision making as freight forwarders. It hasn't gone to that part of the supply chain yet. Although I'm seeing with our competitors, the likes of DHL, DB Schenker, they have business units now that are watching this, but it's still in the early phases. How do you really measure carbon footprint? How do we consult companies so that their supply chains are greener? In my opinion, it's in the early part of the curve.
So you're telling me that you are seeing a time in the horizon where people will say, okay, how much it will cost me to ship? And by the way, also let me know what will be my carbon footprint and what is the quickest way.
Great question. I'd like to say yes. It's my answer to your question. It would be great to think of a world where we look at carbon footprint and it's not even carbon footprint only that matters. It's so many things. It's also creating the goods. I think we cannot have a conversation about sustainability without talking about who's creating our materials, human trafficking and abuse, labor workers. But going back to your question, it would be great to think of a world where this is the key decision-making criteria. Quite frankly, I don't think, not in our lifetime, not in my lifetime, because it really requires a huge mind shift. We're talking about a world wherein we don't care about just making money, where there's more equality and yes, yeah.
Okay, let's take that challenge. Your lifetime is going to be, you being a woman at that age, you will be 100 plus if you listen to all the longevity studies. But I personally think the day may not be very far away, maybe 10 years, that we should be able to pick up any product the way we have right now, calorie information, sugar content, we should be able to see, at least market will demand for it, what has been the carbon footprint, where it came from, what journey, so that people can make a market pull decision. I'll buy this one instead of this because this is organic or has a lesser carbon footprint or NOx footprint.
Yeah, I agree it could be available. My answer was more towards whether this will be the key decision-making factor with regards to companies. But whether it can be available in 20 years, yes, with the direction that technology and the green transition is going, this is possible. And you're right, and that as long as the market demands for it, it will be there. Once the market was willing to pay. So if I pay a bit more just because it's made out of this material and it's coming from someplace closer, then that would also be really good progress already.
Because the world that we have been operating in, where emission was not counted, it's a free fall, right? Always the quotation for a transport or anything has been based on how long it takes, how much it costs. If I had a carbon budget, like I have a travel budget for a business, then I have to say, hey, I took this route, this time I have to drive or walk or whatnot, because if you are operating and there's some accountability. So I don't know, but I think we are heading in that direction though.
We are. I'd like to hear you're much more an expert on this. Recently, we went through a quotation. This is more for my family business. So there's regular air freight cargo coming from Caloocan here in Metro Manila to Zurich. For confidentiality's sake, I'll keep the commodity private. But so that's regular cargo. And as part of the bid starting last year or 2 years ago, they started asking how much is the carbon footprint for each of our. So when we bid, we give out prices, but also the airline, if we want to show it like this, and then they ask for the carbon footprint. It wasn't easily accessible per airline and per trade lane. Maybe Zurich to New York, JFK is available, but Manila to Zurich was definitely not. Maybe airline 1 would have it, but airline 2 does not. In the end, when I asked other colleagues globally, especially in Europe, what they do when they have these kinds of questions, they said, oh, there's this website that just shows carbon emissions, or you can just go to Google. It's almost like searching, let's just say, I'm not sure if it was exact or not, but we have to fill it out. At least it's there. I'd like to hear your thoughts about this being available globally, being able to ask how much carbon emissions is it for a truck from Clark to Manila, from Hamburg to Dusseldorf? Because what you're saying requires that kind of information. And how is it possible for us to get this type of information?
I mean, you can calculate based on underlying engineering of it. So I think the quickest way would be what's the distance with Clark to here, what truck you're using, how old that truck is. Then you can get their sort of liter of gasoline needed for that route. And then there are standards conversion factors for so many kilowatt hour per liter of fuel. So then you can just multiply. Now, this is how we used to calculate for any clean energy project 10 years back, 20 years back at ADB. I remember for an Indonesian project, I made up numbers. But now the world has changed. Now we have a dedicated team who has a very complicated model to calculate. So eventually that will be available for everyone. No?
Good. That's what I needed to hear.
There are websites where you can fill in, but I think the way we are headed, that there will be standard and people will be asking. But I'm really amazed that this asking has already started, because as people are more aware, it will be more and more. Because then you put a pressure on, because the pressure that you got, it got all the way, right? Your client asked for it and you went to an airlines. Why you use that inefficient plane? I don't want to take, I'll take the later flight because I get a cheaper rating. My client might evaluate me based on the number I put in, and it needs to be traceable. Someone might come and say, I want to audit Penny. What did you put out?
The client specifically said it won't be considered yet, but it needs to be there because eventually it will. It's a gradual process, but I think it's progress nonetheless.
Wow. I wanted to ask you something. Now I'm thinking that question got even more complicated, because logistics is not just price, right? It's delivering on that date, because I had turbines getting delivered, this getting delivered. I called up people saying, what's happening? because we already agreed with the client that this will get paid out unless it come in or treasury, because this is like a chunk of $50 million or even bigger amounts.
Was it large equipment you were talking
Large
about?
equipments,
Huge
hydropower equipments, very large transformers, or a lot of goods for transmission towers. So
Yeah.
different countries in
Yes.
Southeast Asia, Central Asia, but a lot of stress, right? Or
Yeah.
stuck on a train crossing borders, don't know what's happening.
Here in the Philippines, the bigger problem is stuck in customs or road conditions or limitations. You have to be a bit creative in order to deliver these goods. And particularly for energy projects, wind turbines and windmills and whatnot, they tend to be in remote locations, right? You can't be in the middle of a place where it's easily accessible. So we call it project cargo in the industry when it's oversized, it's heavy haul, and sometimes requires cranes and engineers to also really get involved. Yeah. So for sure, that's another dimension. It's not just price, it's also delivering on time and safe, that nothing gets damaged.
How do you manage stress? This is a very stressful business you are in. And now you have to talk about carbon as well. Oh my God, if I miss that flight, then I have to pick up the shoddy flight on Wednesday. That's emission is doubled, then I have to reach the same. I mean, it's a lot of things in your head or in the system.
How do I manage stress? The pressure you end up loving. On days that I'm really stressed, it really gets to a maximum. And then when it's not there, I'm looking for it. I'm privileged to not be working really hard on the operations on the ground. That's why I really commend my colleagues and anyone who works in logistics that's really in operations. In a way, they have one task and they just have to do it well. And yes, but the penalties are huge. The repercussions are huge. So it's a lot of teamwork in terms of the orchestrator just managing everything, almost all tiny things, tiny elements, all very manual. And it's also global. We have to talk to the origin and talk to the destination. But yeah, one has to like the stress and the pressure. There's no turning off the mobile phone. It's a family business. I grew up watching my father and mother working together in the same company. We've definitely had discussions where it's much more stressful now. Before, they only had a fax machine and a telephone to deal with. There were time differences and whatnot. But in a way, communication was more concentrated. Now, I would say the biggest source of stress, more than the actual job, it's just there's so many communication channels. People expect an email, and then there's a WhatsApp. Here in the Philippines, Viber is very common. And then they call, and then there's Microsoft Teams for certain meetings. It's hard. I remember reading somewhere that shifting your focus from one subject, but also from one medium to the other, takes up a lot of energy. And that's something I've been very mindful about. Even when you switch from WhatsApp to email, that's already sort of something. And I think very categorically, I would say this is a source of stress. How do I do it? I do time blocks, but the actual job itself, it's okay. It's the actual logistics part of it. I love seeing what moves. And you're really at the center of international trade. So yeah, it's great.
This sentence that you just measured, that pressure and you end up loving it or something, you need to have it. I wish I had that sentence because I had a situation like these things are moving, 4 or 5 projects going on, people lining up, can you do this? And I remember in that crowd, and that's one of the things inspired me to saying, okay, I should retire, do stuff. Someone walked in, one of the consultants, I was trying to see him and know him for a long time. He came in, he closed the door, saying, 30 seconds. I looked at him, what's going on? He said, slow down before you are slowed down. And he just vanished. Hey, this is very ominous. What's going on? He said, I'm catching a flight. Let's catch up some other time. And then a week later, but I wish I had that sentence. Hey, I need the pressure. I like that. I enjoy it. Should you be able to manage? Because I've seen suddenly buckle people saying, can't take it anymore. Sorry.
I had moments for sure. It also requires a really good operations team. That's why I really commended them. I'm more on the commercial side, especially now, but we're building a new company. So in the beginning, it was a lot of operations too. One of the reasons why I was also just not responsive about my availability. But yeah, it requires a big team as well. Yeah. An organization. Yeah. But those are such sage words. Slow down before.
You are slowed down.
I'll remember that. Sorry to ask, was it a colleague or
He's someone I was working with on a consulting project many years back. He's
Mm,
based off Canada. He's, I think, about at least 5, 6 years older than me. But I don't know what's the background, but he said, please do. I've seen people doing this. I also have seen many people running and suddenly had
yeah.
a stroke and become a vegetable that day too. We all run those risks.
Yeah. I know you have a next question, but just coming off of this part of the conversation, it's really rare to find good bosses and mentors. And while we're talking about sustainability and logistics, that's one worrisome situation, especially here in the Philippines, because and actually globally, it was never a sexy job, like an attractive one that a lot of people study for or apply for. But now more than ever, we're lacking really true logisticians. I think that's also something to do with digitalization. But even here in the Philippines, it's not really a profession. We don't have schools that teach freight forwarding. Yes, there's supply chain. Yes, there's customs clearance, but there's no freight forwarding as it is in Germany and Switzerland. Number one. And number two, most of the freight forwarders here are being hired by multinationals.
Mm-hmm.
So, as BPO companies, they're doing documentation, they're doing very rigid work, but for non Filipino companies. I just thought I'd like to say that because we're talking about sustainability, part of it is also having a workforce in the next generations who know what they're doing and aware of all the factors that we're talking about. There should probably be schools or a plan for that.
Yeah, and I think the way the world is headed, a lot of those planning optimization could be done by AI and others. So gathering all the data, because everything is moving so fast. For you to calculate optimum route and suddenly flight got canceled, you need to know, right? But if the systems continuously at each refresh makes sure that every node is alive, right?
Actually, that's the struggle of many companies when they try to move on digitally. And I'm talking across many parts of the supply chain. Say you're creating a very basic track and trace tool. It's almost like when you order off Amazon, you want to see where it's going. That's great, but not all airlines hop on the same platform. Not all airlines give the same available information in the same given time. The airport facility of the US will be different from airport facilities of the Philippines. Even within the Philippines, all the facilities don't really follow the same standard. So that's also been quite the challenge for global trade and logistics in terms of the movement towards digitalization. There's a lot of products wherein it's digital up top, but it's still manual the more you go down. Yeah. But it's all right. As long as we're starting somewhere and it's already available. Yeah.
Yeah, you might consider as part of your startup putting a carbon tracker within Philippine logistics. It's an important aspect. You earlier mentioned bringing something from outside to Metro Manila. Of course, you have a choice of taking a efficient jeepney, I don't know, or maybe train or electric vehicle in future. I was talking to a startup, they just starting logistics on electric vehicle, right? So that will give you almost zero. If somebody tracks, that means someone thinks, that means somebody knocks on the door of the electric vehicle saying, hey, even if your price is a little more, maybe I'll come here because of the other benefits I get.
Yeah, maybe we can have a chat about that. We may have reached out to the same person. I did see on my LinkedIn a company that's trying to do trucking services.
Mm.
I wanted to reach out for a partnership
Yeah.
because customers will start looking for this.
Absolutely. Suppose you provide a service to someone, and if you had a slogan somewhere that least footprint in the Philippines, eventually someone will pick it up. In Australia, I saw a label wine saying grown with solar. I said, what? Then they said, this was a long time back, that we use 100% solar power for all our wine growing. I'll connect with your friend. Actually, I visited their showroom last week. They have about 20, 30 cars, all electric, and they're planning to launch
Here in Manila?
here in Manila.
Oh,
in
beautiful.
BGC, behind BGC.
I'll ask you about it. How was it?
It's nice. The cars are relatively cheap. They build up an inventory. I think they have some deep pocket people behind them to be able to run, because I looked at the inventory. I said, yep, that's quite a large, significant inventory of all kind of vehicles. This morning
Important.
I read somebody's doing 20 vans electric in the Philippines, scaling up. They just raised $100 million or something.
You must be so excited with all this news and
Eventually,
and particularly in the Philippines, given the work that you previously did. How were the electric vehicles imported? I assume so. They're not manufactured here in the Philippines.
I think they are mostly now globally electric vehicles are coming from China, whether it's a Tesla coming from Shanghai to many other cars. The BYD is one of the top seller now. And now as you drive, you see a lot of electric vehicle on the roads.
Yes, in the malls as well. They used to be empty in the parking lot where the plugs would be, and now I'm seeing more cars. So yeah, it started.
Interesting. One thing I wanted to tell that you work in a very stressful industry, but you seem very calm. How do you manage that? What else you do for fun?
So you've seen me on a flight to Art Basel, and now it's a holiday. Oh, it's very particular instances. But I grew up dancing. I grew up quite active with my fitness. So I just try to keep active as much as I can. My current obsession is tennis. I try to keep calm through tennis. I work at the Manila port. Whereas before, I could probably go for a walk here or there. Right now, it doesn't feel like that. But we do have a gym at the office, and I think I'm going to try checking it out. But short answer to your question would be, yeah, sports. This would be the number one thing. I also like reading a lot. On the weekends, I do slow mornings because on a daily basis, it just goes really quickly, my life. So on the weekends, I keep it slow, especially in the morning. Yeah.
You must cook also, right?
I do. I love food. I endlessly watch Top Chef. I cooked for myself too much during the pandemic, but I'm so sick of my own food. I don't like my own food anymore. I haven't cooked for myself since 2022, although I've cooked for others. It was a lot of cooking for myself during the pandemic. I do cook, yeah. Do you?
I used to say that I don't have a right brain, but I did some during COVID, of course, stuck. What else you do? I'm
Oh,
an
yeah.
engineer. I'm good at following instructions, right? How do you inspire a young person getting into your industry? What should they do? You said there are no universities and things like that. Logistics is very interesting because I'm sure it attracts different kind of people who like the challenge, who like to see things done, and maybe quite stressful, but I think for many, me included, sometimes very healthy. Otherwise, I feel, what am I doing?
Great question. My experience, what really attracted me when I worked with Mediterranean Shipping Company, that wasn't really by choice. They were the only company that could offer me a working visa at the time. But despite the job that was just primarily documentation and whatnot, I loved going back to what I said earlier. I loved seeing things move. The entrance is usually travel opportunities. Not all facets of the business allow one to travel, but you can also travel through the actual job. You're learning about places because of the pickup addresses in your documents. You're talking to different partners globally because you have to deal with many different agents globally. And then later on, there are opportunities for actually traveling. So that's number one, the opportunity to travel. You're in the middle of international trade. So I think anyone who is interested in international business, supply chain, but even diplomacy. I wanted to be a diplomat growing up. And because we have to deal with so many different parties, not just nationalities, but we're talking to the manufacturer, the airline, the shipping line, the broker. These are different types of people, and you have to orchestrate everything towards one direction. The skill for communication needs to be quite on point for certain roles. And number three, and this is particularly if you're working for a company within your own country, it's a fantastic way to encourage or facilitate trade for your own country. So I used to work abroad. I really loved working in New York. I was really resistant towards moving back here in Manila when I first was back. But with what I'm doing now, there's a sense of contributing to the economy and the Philippine development because I'm also constantly promoting Philippine trade. I'm talking to buyers overseas about the exports of the Philippines. Or yeah, I'm trying to explain to them what are the intricacies of working with Philippine government agencies and businessmen. Yeah, I would say number one, opportunity to travel. Two, you're at the heart international trade in a very concrete manner. And three, it's a way to encourage trade and contribute to the economy. So those are three things that I
If
would say
people
to me.
has to focus to get into this industry, you must like those things or know about those things.
Yes. And it's also an industry that requires interdisciplinary thinking. Can't be pretty one dimensional. There's a little bit of everything to it. With the project cargo, there's a lot of technical things. Again, communication is key. So you can't just be too technical. You also have to be able to communicate different requirements. So I think it's very apt for the next generation and what's being trained for because we need to be interdisciplinary. Yeah.
How many languages do you speak? Must be.
I learned Spanish when I was in elementary school and high school, but never practiced it. And then I learned German in university during my semester in Berlin. It's tough to keep a language if you don't speak it. You really lose the tongue. I can understand a bit of where my mother is from, but I'd love to pick up on my Spanish and German. That was going to be my pandemic 2.0 activity, but the 2.0 never happened. Yeah.
And it helps because my daughter, I think she speaks now six. She
Wow.
learned Latin in school, and that helped her to get into many languages. When we are traveling through Europe, we are speaking of Germany here, Italian here, and the French there is very good. We are parents just following instructions. So
And what was her reason for choosing certain particular languages?
Latin, I think, was offered in her school in Sydney, and when she came and said, why? But then she said, okay. But that helped her because if you understand Latin, I guess that helped. Then she did in ISM, she did French and Spanish. So she learned Germany in school in Sydney, French and Spanish here, and then she lived Italy for 6 months. So that's
Oh,
us.
beautiful.
So she was
Yeah.
in Rome for 6 months. So now it seems she speaks everything.
Now she knows 6 different worlds. Uh,
Yes,
it,
that's what she was saying. That when she was in Oxford, somebody came in and gave a big lecture in Latin, and he said a long sentence. He said, "I don't expect anyone to answer," and she got up and answered in Latin, and this guy said, "What?" So yeah, I think in your industry, language and understanding body language, understanding culture may be a big thing when you're dealing with lots of people.
it is, yes. Of course, the language is a huge key, but based on my experience, a lot of it is also empathy. One part of, and this was primarily what I was doing with ATN, the family business. I would say one of my favorite parts of working in logistics is building the global network. Just to explain it a bit, so the likes of DHL, DB Schenker, the multinationals, as we call them, they have offices in each country in the world. Whereas we work with independent forwarders like ourselves in each country based on their specialty, where they're located. So I am managing our global partners. I would visit countries, I would go to conferences to choose the right partners for our own customers, but also find whenever they need something in the Philippines, I would be their key contact person to handle their cargo. And these meetings, so there were the ones you would just meet, shake hands, and then good to go. We can carry on with work. But just like any role wherein there's a lot of relationship building, you have to visit each other. It's important to sit down at dinner, ask about each other's families and backgrounds. And this is where a lot of the little nuances of different cultures also comes in, makes it interesting, but also challenging at times. I will never forget that one meeting where I was with a Japanese partner, and he specifically told me Like you have to do your nails if you're gonna go to a meeting in Japan. You're a woman. It shows that you put thought and care about how you look. Like it's very important in Japan. When I did have meetings in Japan, fair enough. Now, every time I go for meetings with Japanese partners, I make sure that I do my manicure and pedicure. But also a continuation, which is quite funny. So I was in Tokyo and I did everything and I wore heels. I even walked through the train and the rain in heels with my pedicure. But when we arrived to the client's location, they make me take off my shoes and wear slippers. Covered my nails. I was like, no, I want you to see my nail and how much I put effort. Yeah. You talk about different languages and how it helps. If the language or learning a new language is not accessible, another way to start off is to just really listen and be observant, non-judgmental, find common ground between different partners and cultures because it's the only way to get things done. It's really the only way.
Absolutely. I think
No,
there was people, I worked in 16 countries. Yeah, you have to attend to little detail. Like I made one mistake. It was an Afghan minister. I think during COVID time, we are having a meeting with the whole Department of Energy. I was not supposed to switch on my camera. Everybody said just an audio call.
Yeah.
Suddenly, this is still in Zoom. A minister appears with his suits and things, and I felt obligated. And I said, okay, this is not right. So I switched on. First thing he said, you look old. You didn't shave. And I said, Mr. Minister, I was not supposed to be online. But he kept on saying that basically, which implied that you came to this meeting without any preparation. And I said, because I was not supposed to be. And I said, it's a waste of time explaining my situation. So we got into the business discussion, but it was in back of my head said, you look terrible. I said, I don't bother about my looks, but what he meant that I didn't have a jacket on, I did not shave, and I was not supposed to be there. But it is important that you turn up in a meeting. I sometimes like a business dinner with a very senior colleague and suddenly see someone just turned up sloppy. I should have made that effort.
But I think these experiences and meeting certain characters and outliers are also pretty, or even being the one that shakes things up a bit, because the next time they see someone who hasn't shaved, maybe they will think, oh, I guess it's becoming normal. The same way, maybe the next young lady that the Japanese agent spoke to, if they're not that well manicured and whatnot, they might show a bit more empathy and openness.
The second time, first
Exactly.
time you break the rules, then that's what is seen. You broke the rules.
Yeah.
But you conform, you engage, then they know who you are. Then you break anything you want. So I
Exactly.
think that works very well. Yes, you knowingly break, but not on
Yes.
the first encounter. Anyway, we can discuss long and long on this cultural nuances that happens in doing business. Especially, it's very important for climate change as well. That's one of the reasons why I started it podcast. There is this Saudi Arabian gentleman who became the best speaker on Toastmasters, I think 5 years back. Or he was saying in a funny way that, you know why climate change problem? Because the scientists keep talking their mumbo jumbo, nobody understands. And they turn up not properly dressed into big meetings. And these people are all diplomats, want to listen, but they can't hear because they're talking at a two different level.
Even if they're speaking English. Yeah.
And then I was attending one of those meetings and I realized this gentleman coming in here. And then one of the COP meeting, one scientist, top scientist came in. It took him 15 minutes to set up the world watching. He said, oh, where is my flash drive?
Yes.
So I think these things are also very important in communicating. So
Very.
that's what I'm hoping. And as the more and more younger generation come in, this sort of fancy part gets off. People actually straight away engage. Okay, why are we here? What we need to do?
Maybe this is a bit of an ignorant question, but you mentioned the engineer who needed to have a presentation and was fumbling a bit in the beginning. I also have heard from some of my engineer friends that they're not so interested in networking. They go to conferences.
Hey, I've got 2 engineering degrees. I never really worked as a engineer. But I understand what you meant.
Princess, they listen to the talks, and then whereas the others would love the networking alcohol bit, they just go back to their own thing without talking. Okay, I'm sure this is a huge generalization, but I do wonder for the scientists, what's the best way of connecting with each other or communicating their ideas? Because words sometimes language feels a bit limited if it's just words, especially if it's your second language. I don't know about visuals. Maybe that's a thing for each different science. But yeah, any tidbits of bridging that gap between sciences and the technical side and those that need to communicate it and execute it, actually.
They need to be Andrew Huberman. I've been following, I think Andrew is number one in the world in terms of podcast and scientific. What he was saying, if I'm not mistaken, that he will publish a journal that takes 6 months, even a year, but 20 people will read it.
Okay.
Out of this, maybe 2 or 3 family members, and some pretend they have read, but ultimately that someone using it as a reference maybe less than 5. That's the intended audience. But
Okay.
now he puts a 2-minute video on TikTok or Instagram. It has 10,000 likes within few hours. So the reach is quite big. So I think, like I posted on Facebook when I visited in Antarctic Research Institute in London. So more than 10 years ago, this gentleman was showing us they drill and get this ice cylinder core. And this is from 200 years ago because the layer of carbon dioxide comes in. And he gave one. I took a one. I was about to leak. Then he said, you don't know what bacteria is down there. So I put it down.
You're crazy. Your first instinct was to lick.
It is a piece of ice. Okay. And he was showing, they have all in the lab, different slices. I was telling him, how many visitors you get? They get half a dozen visitors, not many. These people have the content. They should partner up with whoever advising Andrew Hubermans of the world, because seeing is believing.
Actually, yeah, it sounds simple. You're right. Partnering up. You don't have to do it yourself. You partner up with someone who can do it. Okay.
Changes you are seeing in your industry. AI must have been huge. How do you keep yourself up to date? Like every industry, and you are logistic, where things move by definition, right? Right?
Yeah. So for sure, there's a lot of digitalization going on from different levels. Pricing platforms, there's a push towards becoming like an Expedia, where you should be able to receive a quick quotation from A to B, regardless of the size. Just how before traveling, you had to go to a travel agent. Now you can just get on the likes of Expedia to get your price. That's a significant change that's happened in the last decade or 7 years or so. AI is also transforming the industry, primarily at the warehouses and the port terminals. A lot of work that used to require a lot of manpower is now being replaced by AI.
AI robots, right?
Yes.
AI-driven robots, right?
And talking about language and communication as well, there are tools now being built so that we don't have to speak the same. It's almost like a Google Translate integration, which I welcome a lot, actually. It's about time. There's a lot of new technologies within the logistics space. And I don't know if every industry is going through this, but because there's so many products and possibilities, it can also get a bit confusing because you can get very excited about everything. But if everyone is not talking to each other about the possibilities of connecting, then it's just confusing for possible customers. The perception of the world is okay. I think it's good that all of these products are now available. Now can be the time to connect different products. For sure, there are mergers and acquisitions happening as well. So bigger companies buying each product so that they integrate with one another. But yeah, these are some of the technologies and innovations that have happened. 3D printing is a big one for our industry because then we don't have to move anything. Certain manufacturers can create a prototype or eventually their own product just by placing in a digital version. and it can be printed later on. So I think this is something that I would be interested in seeing firsthand and diving a bit deeper too.
3D printing, if you have original printing where you want to fax, you can print there, right? Something equivalent, right?
Something like that. So now it's really being used for prototypes and trial products. So say I'm a furniture designer and I have a manufacturer in Indonesia. I will design my furniture and then I give it to them and then they send it over. Now we are at a point where I can just design and then print it via 3D printing. In that sense, the manufacturer doesn't have to create anything and nothing needs to be sent. I recently learned that 3D printing is now very much used in the jewelry space. Instead of hiring someone to make the jewelry, they just use 3D printers. This is more for mass production and whatnot. But yeah, it's quite the game changer. Saves on transportation and it saves on operational costs overall. Yeah.
Yeah, 3D printing would be very interesting when it goes to the large scale. One of my friends just posted into social media last week that visiting a 3D printed two-story house in Cambodia or in Japan. I've seen a lot of videos, but I've never seen someone actually going inside a 3D printed house.
Wow, a 3D printer house in Cambodia. That's interesting.
Yeah, because what happened when you are building, say, large scale, the government does low cost housing projects. So if you have the proper cranes and the printer nozzle and you just do the grid, you can print in a much faster rate than traditional technology of mix the concrete, take the concrete, pour the concrete,
Yes.
dry the concrete. But if you do print, it's much easier, right?
Although I'm not very familiar what are the materials used for 3D printing.
Main concrete structure they can do, like up to the plinth level, you're done. I guess someone will put the windows and others, and then you come and print again.
That's another technology that's definitely a game changer. That and AI, for sure.
Yeah, he already has done. What's your thinking? Are we doing enough? Do you feel confident it will get addressed anyway? Which I feel that the amount of attention now being given, technology already there. It might be like Y2K will overcome. We had through, but all the catastrophe somehow we managed to avoid. What do you think?
Are we doing enough? I think it also can be improved by better information being fed to us, better education, information sharing, and also better tools and accessibility to being able to do something. For instance, here in Manila, I would like to recycle. I would like to even segregate, something very basic. But I've also seen that even if I segregate, it all goes to the same bin. Even if I do that very basic step, that's very, I say basic because I've seen countries, this is already the only way of handling your waste. I think we don't do enough, but it's also a matter of better education and tools or the infrastructure to do better. At least from where I stand. Will it be addressed? I think it will be addressed. I don't think anything is really ever addressed fully, but this 100%, even me in life, it's such a abstract goal. But we've come so far from where we started, not even being aware of it and talking about it. Again, carbon emissions. We even mentioned carbon emissions, I don't know, 6 years ago. It was such a silly thought. And now, quite frankly, I feel like if I talk to an 18-year-old customer, they will start asking for carbon emissions. We have gone so far. And these conversations are critical in bridging what you know and what I know, what you're doing versus what I'm doing. It's more critical than ever to have these conversations to also know where to move forward. Because just like there are many parts in a supply chain and it's global, this issue also needs to be tackled in the same way across different levels and disciplines and globally as well.
I like that because with that optimism, we won't be able to do it. But I like the point you mentioned about communication. I just put the fear of God on a person last month. We are looking at a property in a remote town of Victoria, Apollo Bay. Very nice. We found a house. I think I made an offer as well. But then I went through the climate impact in that area. Then I realized, ooh, okay, because this is that part of the ocean, government is actually did a bit of reinforcing inside the beach. They did a lot of breakwater and things like that. And then I told the agents, have you looked at the climate map? This place is subject to this. He said, what's climate change? Nothing. I said, tell your client. This guy came in, he's a very senior, in a mid-70s real estate agent. Obviously, he doesn't care about climate change. So I said, I was planning to put an offer, but I don't think I can. And he was saying, oh, if climate change happens, water will go up, which will come close to you. I said, have you thought about it? Since that day, the good thing is this guy has been reading and he's been texting, hey, government has done this. Have you seen this? I created awareness. This gentleman is a real estate agent. He doesn't care about climate change. Now that I almost made an offer because I was planning to put into writing, and then I said, no, I think it's too much vulnerability, too high, not my taste. And so that really penny dropped for him, for sure. He's reading now.
Yeah. Going back to what I mentioned about just giving the right information and education, I think one of the misconceptions is that it's a future thing where if we're trying to avoid something for our children or our grandchildren. But I think if we put it in the forefront that climate change is a now issue, it's in the air that we breathe. We don't know how bad this pollution currently is, the food that we're eating, how much plastics there are in the fish. Part of that information is also really reiterating the urgency that this is not a problem of the future. It's literally now.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it is in your backyard. It's not
Yeah.
in my backyard syndrome, but I think it
Yeah,
is in
exactly.
backyard, so people should be aware of.
Yeah.
Is there anything else I could have asked I missed, or you want to make some comment?
No, for now, I'm good. And thank you. I'm excited to keep it going. Thank you for continuing this chat.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Energypreneurs. To continue listening to this conversation, please visit us at Energypreneurs. Thank you. See you next time.